What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. Top 5 running backs you should have drafted, or if you haven't drafted yet, this is my final list of my 5 favorite running backs, assuming no one on the list gets injured after recording this. But it's also at different portions of the draft. Obviously, we love a ton of running backs at the top, but it'd be pretty boring just to go over like 5 running backs in the top 14. So if you want my take on all players, and especially that top 14 to help you out in the first 2 rounds, you can check that out at our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. But this video will touch on different portions of the draft. Before we start, of course, gotta do the stat of the day. Yesterday's stat was removing Lamar Jackson's passing, looking only at his rushing. And of course, no receptions. If he was a running back last season, where would he have finished in half PPR leagues? The answer was the running back 23. Today's stat. Last season, which team held their opponents to the lowest points per play? All right, let's talk about my 5 favorite running back picks. So if we look at the top 14, basically everyone should have the same group. They all should be ranked inside the top 17 in my opinion. So 14 running backs inside the top 17 picks. Basically, you take in 2 running backs with your first 2 picks. There are very few negatives with all these players. I know we nitpick, but there are very few negatives. And you're basically only changing that strategy if one of Michael Thomas or Devonta Adams becomes a value. That's how it works this season. Among these 14, I do have a number ranked either like exactly at ADP or 1 spot above or below. The running backs that I have ranked more significantly above ADP than just 1 or 2 spots are Clyde, and this is for overall. So this counts like other positions thrown in there. So overall, who do I have the most above where they're going? Clyde, Miles Sanders, Kenyon Drake, Josh Jacobs, Austin Eckler, and Aaron Jones. Some of that might surprise you. It shouldn't too much if you've seen our takes evolve over the summer. Maybe Aaron Jones does because we're not all over Aaron Jones. I do believe I have him 14th out of this group. But again, since I have this emphasis on running backs, his ADP isn't actually that high, even though I have him pretty significantly below ADP for just looking at running backs. If you look at overall, it's still above ADP because of that emphasis. So who do I like the most among that group? Drake, Jacobs, and Jones are only a few spots above ADP, so we'll kick them out. And it really comes down to my top 3 among these 14 are Clyde, Miles Sanders, and Austin Eckler. And surprisingly enough, I have Clyde the most above ADP since I have him 5th overall in all formats. And he's not really going that early anywhere. So looking at what we want, like what are we looking for in a mid to late, I guess sometimes, first round pick? We want to be 100% sure that this player is going to hit. And we want them to have top overall running back in their ceiling. And if someone tells you that Clyde doesn't fit this mold, they're just lying to you. Clyde is the undisputed lead back now that Williams has opted out, meaning that he's going to get the vast majority of the work near the goal line. He's going to get a ton of targets on the top offense in football. He could be pretty mediocre as a running back and still just crush it in fantasy, but he's not. He's an incredible receiving back. He's more than capable of handling the workload on the ground. He's going to have a season like Kareem Hunt did in 2017, and only a handful of running backs have even close to the same touchdown ceiling as he does. I mean, he could legitimately score 16, 17, 18 touchdowns, catch 70, 75 balls, but at the very least, he'll be involved in all areas, and that's very important. Like, even if he's unlucky with touchdowns, he'll still score 7 or 8. Even if they don't fully feature him in the passing game, he's still going to have a similar workload to guys like Zeke and Miles Sanders and Kenyon Drake. So the floor is incredibly high because we know for a fact he's going to hit on every single category. And his ceiling is obviously running back 1, given that he's the lead back on the Chiefs, right? So these are the guys you want to target in the mid-first round. So I would start taking him 5th overall. Christian McCaffrey, Saquon Barkley, Ezekiel Elliott, Alvin Kamara, Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Those are your first 5 picks in any format this season. So after the top 14, I see running back as like a 4-man tier at 15 through 18. I have all these guys ranked above ADP, and these guys are pretty awesome because they do still have a ton of upside, but you don't need to take them as your running back 1. You could get them as your running back 2 or 3 depending on how you started off the draft. So while they do all come with a little bit more risk, their upside more than pays off for it at their ADP. In order of ADP, this group is Carson, Connor, David Johnson, and Jonathan Taylor. Again, I love all 4, but the one I have most above ADP is David Johnson. And my reasoning is simple. You should not be able to get a workhorse this late. David Johnson does go in like the mid to late 4th round, and he effectively ends the workhorses. Guys like Gurley, Fournette, Carson and Connor, they're all gone at this point. Even Gordon and Bell are off the table. So your options are guys like David Johnson, but when you're looking after him, it's like Devin Singletary, Mark Ingram, Mostert. We know these guys don't have 3-down back in their range of outcomes. At least for David Johnson, we know that he is going to get a 3-down workload. We still do have guys like Jonathan Taylor, who I mentioned, like Swift, like Akers. They could all have 3-down roles at some point in the season, but they're not going to open the season, and there's no guarantee that they ever will in their rookie years. But we know David Johnson will, and that's just impossible for me to pass up because there's really no path to him not getting a ton of touches unless he gets hurt. And that's something you could say about every running back. There's always that caveat that, yeah, they could get hurt. There's their path. But when that's the only path, you love it, right? And especially when they're not even going in the top 3 rounds, when they're going closer to that cliff in success rate. Remember, we talk about after the 4th round, entering the 5th round, that's where the cliff happens. That's where success rate drops off a ton. And so if he's going in that range and his only path to falling off that cliff is getting injured, I love it. So I love all those touches. I don't care about that being the only question mark. They're going to use him a ton. I think he's a great pick at his ADP. Moving on, tier 4 is practically my do not draft tier since I have all 3 running backs in that tier ranked below ADP. But then when we get into tier 5, it's effectively the end of the starters. So that's range 22 through 28 for running backs. After we leave this range, it is all committees. It is all mostly backups. So I said David Johnson ends the workhorses, but this range ends the running backs with a clear workload and a clear significant workload because someone can have a clear workload that's like 2 receptions a game. But this range ends the we're sure about what these guys are going to do, at least from a volume standpoint. The group is kind of a mix for me. I don't love everyone. I don't hate everyone. I do have Bell, Ingram, and David Montgomery all ranked below ADP, at or below. It's very close. And then Swift, Hunt, Akers, and Ronald Jones all ranked above ADP. Of this group, I'm most likely to draft Kareem Hunt. I want to be clear that this has nothing, absolutely nothing to do with that Chubb concussion. He already returned to practice. It was never viewed as something that would cause him to miss significant time. The reason I love Hunt is his combination of upside and floor. We saw the floor last season. He didn't play at all through the first 8 weeks. He was never given double-digit carries in a game when he returned. He never went over 46 rushing yards. He was still the running back 19 overall, 25 in points per game. That is his floor because we're pretty sure he's not going to see fewer than 5 carries per game because when he returned, he only got 5 carries per game. Still running back 19 overall, 25 in point per game. And they're not going to reduce his role now that he's been with the team for over a year, right? Like his role is going to expand. And guess what? He's been productive every time he's been on the field. Whenever Kareem Hunt has been on the field, he's been productive in fantasy football. As a rookie, he finished 5th in points per game. In his second year, he finished 6th. And then I just talked about how he was a low-end running back too when he returned last season. And so coming off the board in the mid-6th round as the running back 28, well, that's pretty confusing, especially when we consider that we've been talking about his floor. His upside, his ceiling is insane. So when you're looking at someone and their floor is that they outperform their ADP and that their ceiling is top 5, because he would rival like Zeke, McCaffrey, Clyde if Chubb were to ever go down, it's pretty rare. It is genuinely very, very rare that you can look at a player and say that their floor is that they outperform their ADP and their ceiling is they win you the league. And when that happens, you have to take advantage. So I love Kareem Hunt as a pick this season. As we enter the 6th tier, everyone has question marks. We have entered the range where it's committees, handcuffs, third down backs, rookies whose role we don't fully know, that we may expect to expand, but is a little bit ambiguous at the moment. But we're also getting into, the 8th round and beyond. And you shouldn't expect to see any workhorses left. Like if there's a workhorse left in the 9th round, people have lost their minds, right? Like that's obviously not going to happen. In this group, I have Dobbins, James White, Zack Moss, and Marlon Mack all above ADP. But Moss is the one that I would most want on my team. Dobbins is extremely close for that upside because if Ingram goes down, Dobbins is going to crush. But it's pretty unlikely that you'll be able to start Dobbins without an injury to Ingram. But I truly do believe you'll be able to start Moss while Singletary is healthy. Probably not in week 1. I think that would be a bold take to just go out there and start him right away. I would want to see how this split works out. But if you're starting your 10th round running back in week 1, you either have the deepest league I've ever seen or the rest of your team is incredible. Like you must have taken a ton of wide receivers, Mahomes, Kittle, like you must have just gone all out and said, I'm abandoning running back, which is a fine strategy, but realize that like when you're looking in the 10th round, you shouldn't be starting these running backs or wide receivers even in week 1. These should be more depth pieces. So overall, you can afford to wait and just see how his role does evolve over this first month. But man, is this kid good. I mean, he is good on the ground. He is very underrated in the receiving game. He's another player who we look for that hits on the 3 key stats: rushing, receiving, touchdowns. So many running backs, especially in the mid to late rounds, can be really good in 1 or 2 of these areas, but they're never going to be, high-end fantasy options because they don't hit in all 3. And it just raises the floor and the ceiling of players when they can contribute in all areas. You can be great on the ground, great with touchdown upside, but just not catch the ball. Or be a great receiving back, but you have no path to early down work. Zack Moss has a path to being featured in all 3 areas, and that is what I'm looking for in this range of the draft. Plus, look at all these reports coming out of camp. Everything is positive about Moss, and what's the only thing we know about Singletary right now? He's struggling with fumbles. That's it. No one's praising Singletary coming out of camp, but every single report from Zack Moss is, yep, this kid's as good as we thought he was. He's exceptional in the receiving game, and he's not the one going out there and fumbling. So I absolutely love Zack Moss. The final group we'll go over is tier 7 in the rankings, where I have a whopping 16 running backs. And this is basically the low probability, high upside tier. Most of these guys need an injury to pay off, but all of them face some sort of uphill battle to get the starting role and to have a nice role in fantasy. Among this group of 16 backs, I have Duke Johnson, Damien Harris, and Chase Edmonds pretty significantly above their ADP. And I really do think all of them are worthy flyers. Reports seem to indicate that Duke is going to be used heavily with David Johnson. We've talked a lot about why they should do this offseason. Duke has been one of the most efficient running backs in the league for years now, and he's such a matchup advantage both out of the backfield and when they split him out wide. That doesn't mean that we don't love David Johnson, because I just talked about David Johnson, right? We can love both David Johnson and Duke. You want to know why? Because everyone is sleeping on the Texans offense in general. Just because they lost Hopkins doesn't mean they're going to be bad. Watson is an incredible quarterback, and it's not like their defense is all that good. I really don't see them taking a step back on offense. They should be in the top 10 this season, and yet their skill players are ranked as if they're a bottom 10 offense. I mean, think about it. Their running back 1 goes in like the mid to late 4th round. Their wide receivers 1 and 2 go in the 7th and 8th round. Duke goes in the 12th and 13th round, and then no one else gets drafted. Like, pieces from the Jaguars, Bears, Bengals are all much more expensive in drafts than pieces on the Texans, even though those 3 teams were all bottom 7 in scoring last season. So I don't get the hate on Texans skill players, but they're basically all values. We also have to talk about Harris, because Sony has actually returned to practice for the first time. I believe it was last Wednesday, but at this point, he's lost the starting job, or at the very least, he's not going to have that same workload he did in these last 2 seasons. Unless Harris gets hurt, I maintain that Sony is undraftable, while Harris is a great late round pick. And you know what? He was creeping pretty high. Now that Sony's back, that's going to stop. So yes, he was going a little bit earlier than we'd like before. As soon as Sony returned, I guarantee you people are going to stop reaching on Harris. And he's just the most fantasy-friendly running back on that roster. And his skill set, like I've talked about with Kareem Hunt, with Zack Moss, it opens up the clearest path to high-end running back production, because Sony is never going to be a high-end running back since he has absolutely no role in the receiving game. We know White is going to never have a role on early downs. We know Burkhead needs injuries to both Harris and Sony to have a relevant role. So Harris has the talent to win the starting job, and if he does, he'll also be featured in the receiving game, and that's what we want. Can't say that realistically about any of the other running backs on this offense, and really any of the running backs going around him. I'll talk about Chase in a second, but there are no running backs going in this range who have a path to have a 3-down workload because they're good, right? The only path that these guys have is injuries. We talk about with Chase Edmonds, he does need Kenyon Drake to suffer an injury to pass him in the depth chart. Obviously, we have this latest injury with Drake. I'm not concerned about it. It seems like they're being overly protective. They're just making 100% sure that he's totally fine to start the season. But this could happen in the middle of the season. Like, he could suffer a number of different injuries that, you don't need to be injury prone to suffer an injury at the running back position. You could just get hit wrong. Okay, so we know for a fact that Chase Edmonds is the clear backup. Those are the ones we want. So when you're looking in this range, you want players who could pass on talent. They're good enough to just take the starting job, or they are the absolute clear handcuff. The guy that if the starter goes down, they're just coming in and taking all the work. Because there are a lot of running backs in this range who that's not the case for, who will come in and take like 50% of the work, and then other running backs will get like 40 and 10% to kind of spread things around. Those aren't the ones we want. We want backups who will come in and just take the full 3-down workload. That is Chase Edmonds. He will be a running back 1 if anything happened to Drake, and he's a great pick in this range. But like I said, Harris is the only running back going this late who has a chance, based on talent, not even injury, to just pass Sony and just be a 3-down workhorse. But we know Sony's also like the highest risk running back, so he still has the path with injury as well. So those are my 5, or really I guess 7 running backs you should have drafted. I know a ton of you actually have drafts either this weekend or this coming week or the following weekend. So if you want to see my full list of players that you should be targeting and avoiding, along with my exact rankings on all players, you can check that out at our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. That's the end of this one. Hope you all did enjoy. If you did, how about hitting that like button? And how about subscribing to the channel if you're new? Thanks for watching.